Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here, and in this video, we're gonna be reacting to some of your watch collecting hot takes. I asked on YouTube as well as on Instagram, what are some hot takes that you have? And in this video, we're gonna be reacting to those, sharing whether I agree or disagree. First one, we come out swinging. Some watches being considered hype and hard to get is overall great for watches. So I think there's two ways you have to look at this. One side for enthusiasts versus the industry. Those are two different things. What I speak to mostly are enthusiasts that like to get into watches and collect them for specific reasons, but there's a lot of overlap. There's people out here that desire certain things in a watch that they want to obtain, and some of that comes with showing that they have something that other people can't have. So there's a whole spectrum of watch collectors out there, and I think they do watch this channel. Now, what do I typically associate with and what do I enjoy? I really don't give that much weight into whether or not I have to wait for something to enjoy it. That is not what is a prerequisite for me for a watch to qualify to be a watch that I want to own. Now, when you look at the figures though of what actually happens and what is going on in the industry, that is drastically different, and it actually supports that this is not even a hot take. This is actually something that's just objectively true. I think a big indication of this is looking at the big four of luxury watches, privately owned companies, not ones part of a larger group. With that, I'm referring to Rolex, AP, Patek, and Richard Mille. If you look at those four brands and added up all of their market share, they account for nearly half, or around 47% of the Swiss market share by retail value in Morgan Stanley and Lux Consult's reports. That is ridiculous. You have four brands that are accounting for basically half the industry's value out of Switzerland. What's another theme for brands like this? They have been some of the most sought after watches with long wait lists for some of their hottest models. And if you added other brands like Cartier and Omega into the mix, it gets even crazier. But I think these big four are the perfect testament to what this concept is, that people, when they are buying luxury, want something that other people can't have. So what moves the needle for this industry? This idea of wait lists and people having to struggle to get products is something that in time has shown that actually is real. If you dig into the data further, outside of the Swatch Group brands like Longines, Tissot, and Swatch, there are no other brands in the top 25 in the Swiss watch industry in turnover with an implied average retail price per watch under $2,000. And Longines just makes the cut, and that's because globally they sell a lot of women's watches, quartz women's watches, and they're just under $2,000. So in summary, this is probably something that I would ultimately agree with. It's good for the industry. It gets certain collectors in, it gets luxury buyers in, and when brands are able to get these type of buyers into their ecosystem, it does fuel growth for the industry, whether we like it or not as enthusiasts. So this next hot take, I can't read this entire thing because it would take me probably a minute to do so, but the general summary of this is that power reserve duration has little to no value, especially for daily wear watches / one watch collections and uncomplicated watches. And they go on to mention how if you do have a complicated watch, you should probably have it on a winder in the first place. So I don't necessarily disagree with this, that power reserves might be slightly overrated. That considered, I do think they are very nice to have. Like a power reserve extended to at least a couple of days is really what I need. I think there's a point where power reserves actually defeat their purpose, and there's other considerations and trade-offs that you need to understand as a watch collector and figure out what you value more. If I have a bunch of watches that are unwound, which is honestly me a lot, I do not wind my watches all the time. I will wear them, and then when they become unwound, I will just set them aside, put them in the box, and when it's time again, if I feel like I'm up to the task to want to get that in motion again, set it, then I'll do it. But I will not dismiss the idea that if a watch is fully wound and it's available to me and I don't have to take that extra 30 seconds to set it, when I'm getting about my day and trying to get out the door, sometimes that's all it takes for me to determine whether or not I'm going to pick a watch or go without it for that day and pick something else that's more readily available to me. I have enough watches where this is enough to move the needle for me. And in addition to that, I think there's a lot of weight that people typically put into the whole idea of winding your watch and building connection when you do this daily. To me, I think that's kind of BS. Yes, there's some truth to it, but where do I find the most enjoyment and connection to a watch is when I actually wear them, not when I'm winding them on a dresser and just like sitting alone in my bedroom. Like that's not where memories are made. Memories are made if it's easier for me to grab that watch and go out the door. That's why I think power reserves do have a case and they are useful. But where I won't go so far to say is that power reserves can't go too far in that they're not necessarily overrated at a certain point. Now, one thing people don't talk about enough is power reserves can come at a cost, oftentimes impacting chronometric performance by providing less power to a balance wheel. Now, to increase the power reserve on a watch, you have a variety of ways to do it. You can either adjust the form factor, which will add maybe more barrels or design traits to how a mainspring is going to wind inside of a barrel. You also have the opportunity to reduce the frequency. We see this a lot with different brands. You see this also with the Swatch Group, where they reduce the ETA 2824 base of the Powermatic series down to 21,600 vibrations per hour. But there's one other way that brands also get around this, and it also is something that typically you don't see, and it's impacting the power to the balance, so the balance power itself. If you're able to deliver more power consistently to a balance wheel, that is going to be beneficial for timekeeping. This is why many brands decide to use the ETA 2824. It is very effective at delivering power to the balance wheel, but it only comes with 38 hours of power reserve. So that is the trade-off that happens in that scenario, but this is also why you'll see many ETA 2824s be certified as chronometers, because they are consistent in their performance. Another example is Omega. They have not that crazy of a power reserve, 55 hours for the 8800 series, and the 8900 series you're seeing around 60 hours. And that jump with an additional barrel, it's only giving you 5 hours. So why are they doing this? It's not the power reserve why they're adding that additional barrel, it's chronometric performance. This is the same understanding that comes with Rolex and having most of their movements be topped off around 70 hours. Same thing could be said for Tudor. And when you get into master chronometer certifications, this is also where you're dealing with a lot of different factors and considerations. There's a reason why many of these brands will focus on that 60 to 70 hours. And this is not to say that watches with longer power reserves are something you shouldn't consider. It's just understanding these trade-offs and where power reserves might have some diminishing returns as well. So if you want to stay in the loop about our upcoming events, we have events basically happening every single month at our boutique, and we are even sampling around with doing some events maybe even outside of Cleveland. If you want to stay in the loop for that, fill out the form down below to be notified for future events. If you're somebody that's been able to take part in some of our events in the last 18 months, I'm sure that you probably had fun, or at least we hope that you had fun. I'm sure people might leave some comments about the different experiences that we've had, but if you want to stay in the loop, be involved in this in the future, definitely fill out that form down below so you're notified for future activations. Mike's Hot Take says, it's the watch community's fault for boring designs. We ask for new and get mad when it isn't the old style. This is true to an extent, but I also think it's partially the brand's fault as well. It's a give and take and a reciprocal relationship that creates what we're talking about here. Now, I do think that as enthusiasts, what happens oftentimes is we say one thing, but we do something very different. And also, it's funny how when something is hated, it's a lot easier to want to leave a comment and discuss about it, where when something's nice, it's just like, yeah, that's great, and just keep scrolling. So it just almost goes by default that that's what we would expect. But what I've also noticed is when brands take daring risks, this is where oftentimes you'll see the biggest pushback, and oftentimes also not a huge gain on behalf of these brands. But I think it's very select brands where you see this being the case. And I think this is where it gets into maybe the brand also being part of the problem. When a brand starts selling the idea of its history, its prestige, thinking about nostalgia, that is going to create a subconscious idea in an enthusiast's mind where looking to the past is where we need to always look to appreciate it in the future. And what did we find in the past? They're designs that we are familiar with mostly. They're not crazy out of the box ideas that we've not seen before. And that's where you'll see a lot of this nostalgia coming into the fold, and mostly safe designs as a byproduct of that. And that's what we like. But that's also what we've been conditioned to like, partially because of what these brands position out there as well. Where I've noticed the most acceptance of new concepts and designs, it's with brands that are not so affiliated with the past. Like look at Christopher Ward with the Bel Canto. That's a weird design. I don't know though, if that was designed by another brand, it would be received the same way, that had different design codes. Probably still would have been relatively well received, but it also wouldn't have been at that price and positioning, which also is a huge consideration if you're thinking about what lands and what doesn't. MB&F, the same story. If another high horology brand that wasn't run by Max Busser was coming out with the Bulldog, would people still like it the same way? And those watches are still polarizing, but they're accepted as these concepts that still can be appreciated by some, and because of the circumstance, it is able to get a pass more than it might for others. If you're a brand like Rolex, if you're a brand like Patek Philippe or AP, where you're appealing to a broader audience and you've also had this history to lean on, it's a little bit more difficult to do something outside of the box. And is the return going to be there for you? Especially when you already have that demand for many of your classic designs. Let's look at a perfect example of this. Like AP has been told for years and years, you gotta do something new outside of the Royal Oak. So they'd start doing it. They did the Code 1159. And if you remember when that watch was released, people hated that watch. It was just getting destroyed and flamed in the comments at the unveiling of that piece. So it goes to show that we say one thing, but then when something else happens, not always a connection. And I actually think the Code 1159 is not that bad of a product. I actually like the design, like some of the perpetuals and some of the iterations that they've come out with after the fact. I don't think that watch deserved that much pushback. Now, is it as legendary as the Royal Oak? No way, but is it a good addition to the AP lineup, and was it the right move for them? I don't think it was something that should warrant that amount of pushback. Even back in 2019, when Lange released the Odysseus, that was a watch that was very polarizing, probably the most polarizing watch that maybe Lange had ever released to that point. Now, as time has gone on, we've come to accept that watch, but for them, that was a daring take on the whole formula that we know them for, and it took some time for people to come along to it. So these are the types of scenarios where it's a give and take with brands. I don't think it's just one person that's responsible or one side of the aisle that's responsible. It's both of it working in sequence with one another to create this end result, but it's an echo chamber of these repeated ideas that do probably stagger creativity as a result. Next hot take, brushing is much better than polishing on most watch cases, especially on non-dress watches. Brushing looks better in 99% of cases since the case won't be a fingerprint magnet, not to mention it is much easier to pull off brushing for cheap as opposed to polishing. So you are right about the second point, polishing is more difficult to master than brushing and it's less forgiving. I do think this is an oversimplification though, so I don't necessarily agree. I generally do like more brush cases, but a completely brush case watch, it just looks cheap. And I think the best combination is I tend to like more brushed elements, but there has to be this element of contrast and reflections that come with polishing. Just a flat case, like if you look at a Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical, it's a watch that's utilitarian and it fits its purpose of doing that job, but it's not like elevated in its case presentation. When you can add these hits of polishing, even on this Omega Speedmaster, I'm wearing a Hesalite Speedmaster right now. This is a watch that is known for being more brushed than the Sapphire version, but still it has polished elements. The crown is polished, the pushers are polished, the lyre style lugs, there's a polished curvature to the lugs, and that adds so much more to the design. If this was completely brushed, this watch would look very flat. I bet if you took a design of this and just photoshopped it and looked at it or saw it in person, if this thing was completely brushed, the lyre style lugs was not polished, that would diminish the look in appearance. My favorite also cases sometimes are those that have these really ultra high reflective surfaces, like Grand Seiko, for example. I love the 62 GS case. If that watch was fully brushed, I mean, that watch would have no character compared to what it does now. You have these hard lines and bevels, and contrast tells a story. Imagine if you saw a movie where everything was just completely blown out and there was no shadow. This is how you have to look at the way cases are finished too. If it's going to fit a purpose of not scratching up, sure, but I don't think this is the right way to look at it. Now, where I might agree with you on is I think there are certain elements of a case that probably are better suited to be polished. I think a perfect example of this is a flat type of center link. If you're going to polish that, that is going to be prone to scratches. So just by default, it's just not going to look as good over time. But I'm also somebody that doesn't really care that much about scratches though, because they are inevitable. That's also not universal for me. I do tend to like sometimes polished center links or interior links if they're done more in this fine link style. That doesn't bother me as much because the surface area is not going to present those scratches in the same way. So it is a loaded topic, but I would say generally speaking, brushing is not always better than polishing, and I actually like polishing more. And I think if more people saw what the reality would be if they didn't have polishing everywhere, despite me complaining about polished center links and how, oh, I can never own that watch because of it, If you saw the reverse of that and you didn't see any polishing on cases, I don't think people would be as excited as they might think they would be. JD's hot take, 40 millimeters is too big. 90% of people should be in a 36 millimeter or smaller watch. That is a ludicrous take, I'm sorry to say it. I know that we were going through a lot of this era of larger cases. We need to see some things sized down, but the goal here should be that all cases and sizes should be represented in a way. I mean, that's like my take on this. You should have the availability to buy something at that size and also larger. I don't think it should be one or the other, and we should determine preferences on somebody else based off of what works for our worldview. I think in general in life, a lot of our problems in just facing the world today come from not understanding the other view of people, and that could be larger ideas, but it also could be ideas around case sizes. I mean, this could solve a lot of issues in the watch collecting world if we could just come to a standard point of peace around watch case sizes. This is just something that I've seen gone back and forth. I've probably created part of this issue because I do have a smaller wrist, but I'm speaking on behalf of both parties, and if somebody's wearing a 42 millimeter case right now, this watch at 36 millimeter would not be great. I would not like this watch nearly as much if that was the case. And case size is also not a full representation of how that watch is going to wear. This watch wears like a 40 millimeter, and even to me, that is the right size for this watch commercially. Because commercially versus what people say and do, again, we've talked about this earlier, very different. Next hot take, elegant dress watch with a t-shirt and jeans looks less out of place than a 44 millimeter diver with a suit. I would agree. I've commonly quoted that it is easier to dress down a dress watch than it is to dress up a larger, chunkier type of sports watch that was never suited for that environment. And I think this also demonstrates an idea that is really strange. It's like this disconnect that people have with the extremes on both sides. When we hear about dive watches being water resistant to 200 meters, we accept that those still can be suitable for environments that would never get near those extremes. But for some reason, when we hear dress watch, we automatically think like black tie, and there's so many enthusiasts that are like, oh, can't find any reason to use that, but they're fine as accepting a dive watch even though they barely go into the deep end of their pool. So it's this weird way that people rationalize these two ideas, and I think if more people took the chance on a dress watch and recognized that, yes, the extreme of being classified as a dress watch is one thing, but the actual lived experience that you can have with that watch on a day-to-day basis is drastically different if you get outside of that extreme view. A lot easier on the sports side. A lot of us are not pilots, but we enjoy the Navitimer. But for some reason, the same thing is not reciprocated on the dress watch side just because of that classification and people being so afraid to wear something that might appear as if it's trying too hard because the world is so casual in its attire nowadays compared to where it was years ago. Even if you have the most rugged of lifestyles, are you gonna be more likely to experience 100 meters of water resistance need or 200 meters of water resistance need? Or maybe a casual scenario where you're not pushing your watch to the limit and you're just out with family, maybe getting dinner. Like, what is more common for you as a person? And I would think for people that even are on those extreme ends of things, you're going to find that you're going to default to something like a dress watch a lot more if you're thinking about that scenario and circumstance than you might think. So next hot take, oh, we're having some fun with this one, 94 thumbs up. A no date is a perpetual calendar. So I see where you're going with this. I like the creativity and thinking about it. This is almost like a riddle for watch collectors, but this is something I have to disagree with because it's just not true. Yes, it is able to perpetually tell you the time. A no date will not be wrong, but it's also not right because a perpetual calendar also needs to be able to indicate and display different things outside than just standard time, usually day, date, month. You're also dealing with the leap year cycle and knowing what the cycle of the leap years are. I get where you're going with this, but I think by definition, given that perpetual calendars measure other things as well and will display those times, that is different than saying a 2-hand watch or a 3-hand watch is a perpetual calendar. So sorry, unfortunately, I will have to disagree with this one. Next hot take, the most complex micro adjustment clasp is literally less complicated than the simplest mechanical movement, and there's absolutely zero excuse for any modern watch bracelet to not feature micro adjustment. So I do think that micro adjustment is valuable. I also don't think that you can go so far to say that there is no excuse for it. And I think the reason for that mostly is because people overlook the different types of clasps and what is the intention of the design. If you have a butterfly clasp or something that's more elegant, I'm assuming that you're referring to micro adjustment on the fly, not just micro adjustment with like holes in a clasp. But if you have a more elegant presentation and trying to add on the fly adjustment, those are two ideas that are at odds with one another. If you look at a crown clasp from Rolex, this is not something that could easily integrate on the fly adjustment. And I think part of the reason why that clasp is so great, I mean, if you look at this, have you ever worn one of these clasps? It is amazing just how it's hidden and everything is in a seamless line with one another. That adds to the design. So micro adjustment would hurt what is being presented there as a byproduct of that. Also, there is something to be said about not using an outside vendor and not infringing on a patent. This is why many brands will just have to use an outside supplier to do these types of tasks because they don't have the capability to do it in-house. And micro adjustment, I know it seems like it might be easy, but to do your own system and not to infringe on another brand's design is actually not that simple. Do I think in a dive style class, we should be seeing at least holes at the very bare minimum? Yes, I think that definitely makes sense, and I do think that we should be advocating for it more. But to say that this should always be the case for all different types of watches, even more dress-oriented watches, I don't think I agree with that fully, mostly sports watches. And I do think that there are different ways to exercise micro adjustment without having it on the fly and still keeping it seamless. This is where small half lengths come into play, but safe to say that I agree with you on sports watches. This should be a step forward, but there are scenarios where it maybe doesn't make as much sense because of different desires that a brand might have in mind and aesthetics that go along with it. Last hot take, Swatch Group should start their own Watches and Wonders event. So the tough thing about this is, and why I don't think it will ever happen, is because the Swatch Group is very different than other groups where they have products from Flick Flack and Swatch up to Breguet, and they would never want to put those brands together in one event. That would not be a good use. Now, Baselworld back in the day maybe made it more acceptable, but I think just now, given the way that the industry operates, I don't think that that would work anymore where you have more entry-level brands with higher tier brands. I think affiliation and co-tenancy is too important for these names where they will not want to do that anymore. But also, in their defense too, I think there are just better digital ways of rolling things out. If you're not going to partake in Watches and Wonders, which is so expensive for brands, by the way, it's like millions of dollars for a brand to partake in that show. And the amount of money that I know that is dumped into that show every single year, if I was operating the industry and I could make decisions and I was running a brand, I would just say it's probably a waste of time and a waste of resources. We should be focusing on more digital ways to meet customers. Also with our retailers and press, there are better, more cost-effective ways to do this. I know that is not the way that the luxury industry works and operates on, but I think you could still create a luxury experience without the same amount of investment required, where I think a lot of it is wasted and not creating results. But to the point around the Swatch Group, I don't think it's going to happen. I also think it's just because of how expensive it would be to do it to the same scale, and because Watches and Wonders exists, it is also this huge spectacle. There might be this feeling of having to one-up one another, and I don't think that that would be a good use of capital or time for the Swatch Group to do that. But all right, guys, that is a video here today looking at some of your hot takes. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Really do appreciate that. If you want to be in the loop for future hot takes, be sure to be following along on all of our social channels so you can stay in the loop when we have a new prompt asking for this. I always like doing these and try to do these a couple times a year, if not more. Also, if you are in the market for a watch, definitely check out teddybaldassarre.com. teddybaldassarre.com is an authorized dealer for over 35 brands. Every purchase from our website comes with quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. Also, if you're ever in the Cleveland area for an event or for any other reason, please do stop into our store, a store that opened up last February, and absolutely been a joy to be able to see some of you guys come into those doors and visit us and be able to talk watches. All the people that run that store are watch enthusiasts as well. They've been on this journey with me for years, help support us and the content we're buying online as well as in the store. So really do appreciate that as well. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.